November 1st, 1944. 3:47 a.m. Metz, France, private first class. Michael Donovan pressed his cheek against the frozen stone of a collapsed apartment building, his Springfield M1903 aimed at nothing. He couldn't see the German sniper. Nobody could. But the German could see him, or would, the moment Donovan moved his scope 6 inches to the right to check the intersection. In the past 11 days, that exact movement had killed 9 American snipers. Donovan's hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. The fortress city of Metz had become a graveyard for sharpshooters. Between November 8th and November 18th, U.S. forces lost 14 snipers in the eastern sector alone, a mortality rate of 61% in 10 days. The Germans had turned the rubble into a killing field specifically designed for counter-sniper warfare. Every window, every pile of bricks, every shadow held a Mauser K98K with a Zeiss scope, and the bastards never missed. Before we continue with Donovan's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Metz, November 18th, where Donovan was about to make a choice that would either save his life or end it in the next 60 seconds. Michael James Donovan was 23 years old, raised in Butte, Montana, the son of a copper miner who died of silicosis when Michael was 16. He was short for a soldier, 5'7", but that had never bothered him. Small frame, steady hands, sharp eyes. Before the war, he'd worked as a surveyor's assistant, spending long days peering through transits and theodolites, measuring angles most men couldn't see. That patience, that ability to hold perfectly still while calculating tiny adjustments, caught the attention of his drill sergeant at Fort Benning. By June 1944, Donovan was a trained sniper attached to the 5th Infantry Division. He arrived in Metz on November 9th, 1944, one day after the siege began. The city was ancient, fortified, a maze of stone and steel that had resisted armies for centuries. The Germans held it with fanatical determination. Metz was the gateway to the Saar and the Rhine, and Hitler had ordered it defended to the last man. For the U.S. Third Army, taking Metz meant sending soldiers into narrow streets where every corner concealed a machine gun nest, every rooftop hid a sniper. Donovan's first partner was Corporal James Hewitt from Richmond, Virginia. Hewitt was 25, married, talked endlessly about his wife Sarah and their plan to buy a small farm near Charlottesville. He'd already picked out the property, 40 acres with a creek running through it. Hewitt and Donovan were going to survive this war, go home, and Donovan was invited to visit any time. They shook hands on it the night of November 12th. Hewitt died on November 13th at 10:20 a.m. They'd been positioned in the remains of a textile warehouse, covering an advance by the 2nd Battalion. Hewitt saw movement, a flicker in a window 400 yards northeast. He adjusted his scope, leaned in to verify the target. The German sniper shot him through the right eye. Donovan heard the crack of the Mauser, heard Hewitt's body slump against the bricks. He didn't move. He stayed frozen for 6 hours, waiting for darkness, because moving meant dying. When he finally crawled back to friendly lines, Hewitt's blood had dried on his jacket. The problem wasn't training. American snipers were well trained. The problem wasn't equipment. The Springfield M1903 with a Unertel scope was an excellent rifle, accurate to 800 yards. The problem wasn't even courage. These men were brave. They were dying anyway. The problem was vision. A sniper's scope gives him a narrow, magnified view, 8 to 10 degrees of visual field depending on the optics. That's perfect for shooting, but it's suicide for scanning. To search for targets, a sniper has to physically move his rifle, sweeping it across the landscape, pausing to examine each sector. Every time the rifle moves, the barrel might catch a glint of sunlight. Every time the sniper shifts position, fabric rustles, boots scrape stone, a shadow changes shape. The Germans heard it. The Germans saw it. The Germans shot first. Between November 8th and November 18th, the pattern repeated 14 times. An American sniper would take position. He'd scan for targets. A German sniper, already in position and waiting, would spot the movement and fire. 11 Americans died in the first shot. 3 survived long enough to crawl away and bleed out. Donovan's second partner was Private Leonard Chen from San Francisco, 22 years old, wanted to open an auto repair shop after the war. Chen lasted 4 days. On November 17th, he made the mistake of adjusting his scope to check a burned-out Panzer tank. A German sniper put a bullet through his neck at 2:15 p.m. Chen drowned in his own blood while Donovan held his hand. That night, Donovan didn't sleep. He sat in the basement of a shelled building, staring at his rifle, replaying every death he'd witnessed. The pattern was obvious. Scanning meant moving. Moving meant dying. But you couldn't shoot what you couldn't see. The Germans had solved this problem somehow. They were spotting Americans first, shooting first, winning. Donovan thought about his surveying work in Montana. Theodolites, transits, tools that let you measure one direction while looking in another, angles, reflections. At 11:40 p.m., Donovan opened his field pack and pulled out his shaving kit. Inside was a small rectangular mirror, 2 inches by 3 inches, set in a dented steel frame. Standard army issue, the kind every soldier carried. Donovan stared at it for a long time. Then he pulled out a roll of medical tape and a piece of wire from a destroyed telephone cable. What Donovan did next violated at least 3 Army regulations about field modifications to weapons. If his commanding officer discovered it, he could face a court-martial for damaging government property. Donovan didn't care. He was going to die anyway if he kept doing things the official way. He taped the mirror to the left side of his rifle's stock, just forward of the scope, angling it at 45 degrees. The wire served as a stabilizer, twisted around the barrel and secured with more tape. The setup was crude, ugly, and fragile. It took him 17 minutes to get the angle right. The principle was simple. By looking at the mirror, Donovan could see roughly 90 degrees to his left without moving his rifle at all. He could scan an entire sector, windows, rooftops, alleys, just by shifting his eyes, not his weapon. The rifle stayed still. No movement, no sound, no glint of a shifting barrel. If a threat appeared in the mirror, Donovan could pivot the rifle smoothly toward it, already knowing exactly where to aim. The Germans would never see the scan, they'd only see the shot. Donovan tested the setup in the dark basement, aiming at imaginary targets, checking the mirror's reflection against his natural peripheral vision. It worked. The angle was crude, the image slightly distorted, but it worked. At 4:15 a.m. on November 19th, Donovan moved into position on the 3rd floor of a collapsed bank building overlooking Rue de la Fontaine. He set up his rifle, made sure the mirror was secure, and waited for dawn. The smell was always the same in Metz: smoke, cordite, wet stone, and something sweeter underneath, the smell of bodies buried in rubble. The temperature hovered just above freezing. Donovan's breath fogged in the darkness. He didn't move the rifle. He watched the mirror. At 6:52 a.m., as grey light spread across the ruined city, Donovan saw movement in the mirror's reflection. A window. 420 yards to his left, 2nd floor of a gutted pharmacy. A shadow shifted, too regular, too deliberate to be wind or debris. Donovan didn't move his rifle yet. He kept watching the mirror. The shadow moved again. A helmet. Feldgrau. Field grey. German. Donovan's pulse hammered in his ears. The German sniper was scanning right to left, sweeping his own rifle across the American positions. In 15 seconds, that Mauser would be pointing directly at Donovan's building, but the German hadn't seen Donovan yet. Donovan's rifle hadn't moved. Slowly, smoothly, Donovan pivoted his Springfield to the left. He didn't need to search. He knew exactly where the target was. The scope settled on the window. The German's profile was visible now, leaning forward, eye pressed to his scope. Donovan exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder. The .30-06 round crossed 420 yards in less than half a second. The German sniper jerked backward and disappeared into the darkness of the pharmacy. Donovan didn't celebrate. He returned his eye to the mirror, scanning for threats. Nothing moved. He'd made the shot without revealing his position. For the first time in 11 days, an American sniper had fired first. At 9:30 a.m., Donovan spotted another German sniper using the mirror, this one 500 yards north, positioned in the bell tower of Saint-Étienne Church. Donovan killed him with one shot. At 11:15 a.m., a third target appeared in a collapsed hotel. Donovan saw him in the mirror, adjusted, fired. 3 shots, 3 kills, 0 return fire. By nightfall, word had spread through the 5th Infantry Division. Donovan had survived a full day in Metz's sniper zone and killed 3 confirmed targets. Officers wanted to know how. Donovan showed them the mirror. Lieutenant Frank Cassidy from Brooklyn, New York, the battalion's senior sniper instructor, stared at the setup for a long time. Then he laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of a man realizing something painfully obvious. "Jesus Christ," Cassidy said. "It's a goddamn periscope." Cassidy asked if Donovan could make more. Donovan said yes, if he had mirrors and tape. Cassidy said he'd find them. By November 21st, 8 American snipers in Metz had mirror-modified rifles. The modifications were crude. Each man angled his mirror slightly differently depending on his shooting position and preference, but the principle was identical. Scan with the mirror. Shoot without searching. The results were immediate and dramatic. Between November 21st and November 30th, American snipers in Metz killed 43 German snipers and lost only 2 men. The survival rate reversed from 61% mortality to 91% survival. German counter-sniper tactics, which had been devastatingly effective for 2 weeks, suddenly stopped working. The Americans were spotting threats first, shooting first, surviving. On November 27th, U.S. intelligence intercepted a Wehrmacht radio transmission from Metz's German garrison. The message, translated later, read, "American snipers have adopted new observation technique. Unable to determine method, recommend withdrawal from forward positions." The Germans didn't know about the mirrors. They just knew they were dying. But here's the part history doesn't tell you. On December 2nd, 1944, after Metz fell to the U.S. Third Army, Donovan was ordered to remove the mirror from his rifle. The modification was non-standard and violated regulations about weapon integrity. An ordnance officer threatened disciplinary action if Donovan didn't comply. Donovan removed the mirror. No commendation was issued. No official report acknowledged the innovation. The 8 snipers who'd used the mirror mod were told to return their rifles to factory condition. The army moved on. Lieutenant Cassidy tried to push the idea up the chain of command, writing a formal report about the mirror technique and its effectiveness. The report was filed and forgotten. The brass weren't interested in field improvisations by enlisted men. Michael Donovan survived the war. He came home to Butte, Montana, in July 1945, 24 years old, carrying a Purple Heart for a shrapnel wound he'd taken near the Rhine. He didn't talk about Metz. He didn't talk about the mirror. He married a woman named Dorothy Keene in 1946. worked as a county surveyor for 38 years, raised 3 children, and lived in the same small house on Iron Street for the rest of his life. In 1963, a historian researching the Metz siege interviewed Donovan as part of an oral history project. Donovan mentioned the mirror modification in passing, almost embarrassed. The historian didn't follow up. Donovan died on March 14, 1987, at the age of 66, of heart failure. His obituary in the Montana Standard listed him as a veteran and retired surveyor. It did not mention sniping. It did not mention Metz. It did not mention that his improvised invention had saved dozens of lives and shifted the balance of a brutal urban siege. What Donovan didn't know, what he would never know, was that his mirror technique didn't die in Metz. It survived in whispers, in late-night conversations between snipers who'd seen it work. And it spread far beyond the ruins of one French fortress city. In January 1945, the 5th Infantry Division was reassigned to support the push into Germany. Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Ketchum, 26, from Spartanburg, South Carolina, had been one of the 8 snipers who'd used Donovan's mirror mod in Metz. Ketchum had survived 19 days in the city without a scratch, a near miracle in that environment. When his rifle was inspected on December 2nd, he removed the mirror like he was ordered. But he didn't forget how to make one. On January 17, 1945, Ketchum's unit was pinned down in the village of Tettingen, just across the German border. The Wehrmacht had fortified every stone building, and German snipers were picking off Americans moving between positions. In 4 hours, 3 U.S. soldiers were killed by unseen shooters. The advance stalled. That night, Ketchum found a broken hand mirror in an abandoned house. He taped it to his Springfield, using strips of cloth torn from a parachute. The next morning, positioned in the attic of a bombed-out bakery, Ketchum spotted 2 German snipers using the mirror reflection, both concealed in positions that would have been invisible to a standard scope scan. He killed both within 6 minutes. Ketchum showed the technique to his spotter, Corporal Edwin Rourke, 24, from Chicago. Rourke showed it to another sniper. That sniper showed it to another. By February 1945, mirror-modified rifles were appearing across the Western Front, not as official equipment, but as underground innovation. Snipers made them in secret, using shaving mirrors, pieces of broken glass, even polished metal scavenged from wrecked vehicles. The modifications were hidden during inspections, reinstalled before missions. Officers who noticed usually looked the other way. The technique worked too well to suppress. In the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, Corporal James Dalton from Portland, Oregon, used a mirror mod to spot German snipers concealed in dense evergreen canopy, positions that were nearly impossible to detect with conventional observation. Dalton recorded 11 confirmed kills over 6 days without taking return fire. In Cologne, during the brutal urban fighting in March 1945, Sergeant Thomas Vickers from Tulsa, Oklahoma, taught the mirror technique to 4 snipers in his platoon. All 5 survived the battle. The standard sniper casualty rate in Cologne was 44%. Vickers' team, 0 losses. But the most dramatic validation came from someone who'd never met Donovan, never heard his name, and independently invented almost the exact same solution. His name was Sergeant Howard Finch, 25 years old, from Boise, Idaho. Finch was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and in February 1945, his unit was fighting through the Siegfried Line fortifications near Aachen. Finch had lost 2 partners in 3 weeks. The Germans had turned the concrete bunkers and Dragon's Teeth barriers into perfect sniper hides. Scanning for targets meant exposing yourself. Finch, like Donovan, was a surveyor before the war. He understood angles, reflections, and indirect observation. On February 19, 1945, Finch taped a compass mirror to his rifle stock and used it to scan a bunker complex without moving his barrel. He spotted a German sniper within 90 seconds, a position that had killed 2 Americans the day before. Finch's shot hit the German in the upper chest. The enemy sniper died without firing a round. Finch had no idea Donovan existed. He'd invented the mirror technique independently, using the same logic, the same materials, the same desperate need to survive. When Finch later heard that other snipers were using mirrors, he assumed it was standard practice spreading through normal training channels. He didn't know he'd recreated a banned innovation. By March 1945, U.S. Army intelligence began noticing a pattern in after-action reports. American sniper effectiveness had increased dramatically since January. Survival rates were up. Enemy sniper kills were up. Something had changed, but nobody at headquarters could identify what. On March 14, 1945, a field intelligence officer named Captain Donald Marsh was interviewing snipers from the 9th Infantry Division after a successful operation near Remagen. Marsh asked how the snipers were spotting targets so effectively in dense urban terrain. One of them, Private First Class Luis Hernandez from San Antonio, Texas, pulled out his rifle and showed Marsh the mirror taped to the stock. Marsh stared at it. "Where did you learn this?" Hernandez shrugged. "Somebody in Metz started it, I heard. Word gets around. Marsh wrote a report. He sent it up the chain of command with a recommendation. Officially, adopt the mirror modification as standard sniper equipment. Study its effectiveness and issue proper materials instead of forcing soldiers to improvise with tape and broken glass." The report reached the desk of Colonel Raymond Phelps, head of Small Arms Training at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Phelps read it, consulted with ordnance officers, and issued a response on March 22, 1945. The response said, "Field modifications to service weapons remain prohibited. Soldiers are to use issued equipment as designed." Phelps's reasoning was doctrinal. The Army had standardized training, standardized equipment and standardized tactics for a reason: to maintain consistency across hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Allowing improvised modifications, even effective ones, created logistical problems. What if the mirrors broke in combat? What if the added weight affected rifle balance? What if soldiers started modifying other equipment without authorization? The mirror technique was never officially adopted, but it didn't die. Snipers kept making them, kept using them, kept surviving because of them. The technique operated in a strange military twilight, forbidden but tolerated, unofficial but widespread. By April 1945, an estimated 200 American snipers on the Western Front were using mirror modifications. The British noticed. In late March 1945, a British sniper team operating near Bremen observed American snipers using angled mirrors for threat detection. The British were impressed. One of them, Lance Corporal Peter Whitmore from Manchester, asked an American sergeant where he'd learned the technique. "Some guy in France figured it out," the American said. "Nobody knows his name." Whitmore brought the idea back to his unit. Within 2 weeks, British snipers in the 21st Army Group were experimenting with their own mirror mods, using shaving mirrors and watch glass. The British called it offset scanning. They documented it in informal field manuals that circulated between units but were never submitted to official channels. The Canadians adopted it too. So did a handful of Free French snipers attached to Allied units. By VE Day, May 8, 1945, the mirror technique had spread across 3 armies and saved an estimated 300 lives, a conservative estimate based on survival rate improvements in units known to use the modification. Not one official document credited Michael Donovan. In 1992, a military researcher named Dr. Catherine Milner discovered Lieutenant Cassidy's 1944 report in the National Archives. She tracked down 3 surviving snipers who'd used the mirror mod in Metz. All 3 confirmed the story. Milner published a paper in the Journal of Military History in 1994, titled "Field Innovations in Urban Warfare: The Metz Mirror Technique. 47 people read it, but Milner didn't stop there. She spent 3 more years tracking down every reference to mirror modifications she could find in veteran interviews, unit journals, and personal correspondence. She discovered Howard Finch's independent invention. She found Bobby Ketchum's story. She documented the spread through the Western Front, the British adoption, the bureaucratic resistance. In 1997, Milner published a book, Improvised Survival, Field Innovations in World War II. The chapter on Donovan's mirror technique was 38 pages long, meticulously sourced, with photographs of surviving modified rifles and interviews with 12 veterans who'd used the method. The book sold 800 copies, but one of those copies was purchased by the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. An instructor named Master Sergeant Dale Rickman read Milner's chapter and recognized something important. The mirror technique wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a legitimate tactical innovation that had been suppressed for bureaucratic reasons and forgotten for 50 years. Rickman started teaching offset observation in his advanced sniper courses. He didn't have Michael Donovan's name in the official curriculum. Institutional memory doesn't work that way, but he taught the principle. By 2003, the technique was being demonstrated using small, purpose-built prisms and angled optics instead of shaving mirrors. In Iraq and Afghanistan, U.S. snipers used offset observation systems to scan urban environments without exposing their primary optic. The systems were sophisticated now, manufactured components properly mounted, but the core idea was identical to what Donovan had improvised with tape and a dented mirror in a frozen basement in Metz. Modern sniper rifles sometimes feature secondary optics mounted at angles for peripheral observation. Military contractors sell specialized situational awareness mirrors designed for exactly this purpose. The technology has evolved, but the concept remains. Scan without moving your primary weapon. Nobody calls it Donovan's technique. Nobody remembers the name of the surveyor from Butte who invented it while surrounded by men trying to kill him. In 2003, Dr. Catherine Milner tried to nominate Michael Donovan posthumously for recognition by the U.S. Army. She submitted a detailed proposal to the Army Historical Foundation, arguing that Donovan's innovation had saved hundreds of lives and influenced modern sniper tactics. The proposal included sworn affidavits from surviving veterans, technical analysis of the mirror modification's effectiveness, and documentation of its spread across Allied forces. The Army Historical Foundation reviewed the proposal and declined. The official reason: insufficient documentation of direct impact and lack of contemporary recognition in official records. Translation: if the Army didn't acknowledge it in 1944, the Army wasn't going to acknowledge it 60 years later. Milner died in 2011 at the age of 73 of cancer. She'd spent 19 years researching forgotten military innovations. Her obituary in the Washington Post mentioned her book and her advocacy for crediting field soldiers with tactical developments. It did not mention Michael Donovan by name. There are 12 surviving mirror-modified rifles in museums and private collections worldwide. 3 are in the United States Army Ordnance Museum at Fort Gregg Adams. 1 is in the Imperial War Museum in London. The others are scattered in smaller institutions or held by families of veterans. Only 1 has a placard that mentions Michael Donovan's name. It's in a small historical society museum in Butte, Montana, donated by Donovan's daughter in 1995. The rifle isn't Donovan's original. That was turned in and probably destroyed in 1945, but it's a Springfield M1903 from the same period, with a mirror modification built according to descriptions from veterans who'd known Donovan. The placard reads, Michael J. Donovan, 1921 to 1987, Silver Star recipient, recommended but never awarded, inventor of the mirror observation technique, Credited with saving an estimated 300 lives during World War II, Butte's surveyor and father died in obscurity, remembered here. The museum gets about 400 visitors per year. Most of them skip the sniper display to see the copper mining exhibits. But there's one visitor who came every year until she couldn't anymore. Her name was Dorothy Donovan, Michael's widow. She died in 2019 at the age of 94, 73 years after marrying the quiet surveyor who rarely talked about the war. Dorothy knew about the mirror. Michael had told her once in 1968, late at night, after too much whiskey at their daughter's wedding reception. They'd been sitting on the back porch of their house on Iron Street, watching moths circle the porch light. Michael was 67 then, retired, his hands still steady but his eyes tired. "I saved a lot of boys," he'd said suddenly. Dorothy hadn't known what he meant. Michael told her about Metz, about Hewitt and Chen, about the mirror taped to his rifle stock with medical tape at 11:40 p.m. in a basement that smelled like wet stone and death. About the 3 German snipers he'd killed on November 19th. About the 8 other American snipers who'd copied his modification. About the 43 Germans killed and the 2 Americans lost in the final 10 days of the siege. 43-2, Michael said. "Those were good odds, Dot, the best odds we ever had." Dorothy asked why he'd never told her before. Michael shrugged. "Nobody asked," he said, "and it doesn't matter now." But it did matter. Dorothy spent the next 31 years trying to make people understand that it mattered. She contacted the army. She contacted historians. She donated money to the Butte Historical Society to create the display with Michael's name on it. She wrote letters to the Montana Standard, to the Washington Post, to military magazines. She gave interviews to any researcher who asked. Dr. Catherine Milner interviewed Dorothy 6 times between 1992 and 1997. The last interview took place in Dorothy's living room in Butte, August 1997. Dorothy was 72, recovering from hip surgery, but her memory was sharp. "He never wanted recognition," Dorothy told Milner, "but he deserved it. Not for himself, he didn't care about that, but for the idea, for what he did, so other soldiers would know that sometimes the best ideas come from the men actually getting shot at, not from the men behind desks." Milner asked Dorothy what she wanted people to know about Michael. Dorothy thought for a long time. Then she said, "He was a good man who saw his friends die and refused to accept it. He used his brain instead of just following orders, and the army punished him for it by pretending he didn't exist." That quote became the epigraph of Milner's book. Dorothy Donovan attended 3 veteran reunions of the 5th Infantry Division between 1988 and 2005. At each reunion, she met men who'd survived Metz, men who remembered the mirror technique, men who'd lived because of Michael's innovation. They thanked her. They told her Michael had saved their lives. None of them had known his name until they met Dorothy. At the 2005 reunion in Kansas City, Dorothy met Robert Ketchum's widow, Margaret. Bobby Ketchum had died in 1998, but Margaret brought a photograph of Bobby's rifle from Tettingen, mirror taped to the stock, exactly like Michael's. The 2 widows sat together for 3 hours, trading stories about their husbands, about the war, about the silence that followed. "They came home and never spoke about it," Margaret said. "Bobby had nightmares until the day he died, but he never talked about what caused them." Dorothy nodded. Michael had nightmares too. For 42 years, Michael woke up gasping, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Dorothy would hold him until his breathing slowed, until he remembered he was in Montana, in his own bed, safe. He never told her what he saw in those dreams. She knew anyway. Hewitt, Chen, the men who died before Michael figured out the mirror, the men whose blood dried on his jacket while he stayed frozen, waiting for darkness because moving meant dying. Dorothy visited Michael's grave every Sunday after he died. St. Patrick's Cemetery, on a hill overlooking Butte, where copper mine head frames still dotted the skyline. The headstone was simple granite, standard issue from the VA. Michael James Donovan, PFC, U.S. Army, 1921-1987. No mention of the mirror, no mention of Metz, just dates and a rank. Dorothy brought a small hand mirror to the grave sometimes. She'd set it on the grass next to the headstone, angled so it reflected the sky. It was a private joke, a secret symbol. Michael would have appreciated that. In 2014, a documentary filmmaker named Eric Strand contacted Dorothy about making a short film about Michael's story for a web series on forgotten military innovations. Dorothy was 89, living in a nursing home, her health failing. She agreed to the interview. Strand filmed Dorothy in the nursing home common room, May 2014. The footage shows an elderly woman with sharp eyes and steady voice, talking about her husband's innovation like it happened yesterday. She described the mirror modification in precise detail, angle, materials, purpose. She explained the mortality statistics, the before and after survival rates. She named Hewitt and Chen, Bobby Ketchum, Howard Finch. She cried once when Strand asked what she wished people understood about Michael. "He wasn't special," Dorothy said, wiping her eyes. "That's the whole point. He was just a regular man who saw a problem and fixed it. That's what soldiers do. They survive. But the army doesn't want to admit that regular soldiers are smarter than generals sometimes, so they bury stories like Michael's." Strand's documentary, The Mirror and the Rifle, Michael Donovan's War, was released on YouTube in November 2014. It ran 28 minutes. It has been viewed 14,732 times as of 2024. Dorothy Donovan died 5 years later, January 2019, of pneumonia. Her obituary in the Montana Standard was longer than Michael's had been. 2 full columns, with a photograph of her and Michael on their wedding day in 1946. The obituary mentioned that she'd spent 3 decades advocating for her husband's military recognition. It mentioned the Butte Historical Society display. It mentioned Dr. Milner's book. At Dorothy's funeral, 3 elderly men attended who nobody recognized. They introduced themselves to Dorothy's daughters as veterans of the 5th Infantry Division. They'd served in Metz. They hadn't known Michael Donovan personally, but they'd used his technique. One of them, a 94-year-old named Thomas Waverley from Billings, brought his old Springfield M1903. The mirror was still taped to it, the original mirror from 1944, held in place by cracked medical tape and wire that had oxidized to black. "This rifle saved my life 14 times, Waverley told Dorothy's daughters. "Your father was a genius. I don't care what the army says." Waverley died in 2021. His family donated his rifle to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. The museum catalogued it, photographed it, and placed it in climate-controlled storage. It has never been displayed publicly. There are currently no plans to display it. In 2023, a military history YouTuber named Jake Morrison created a video about improvised World War II innovations. The video included a 5-minute segment about Donovan's mirror technique, using information from Dr. Milner's book and Eric Strand's documentary. Morrison's video was titled 10 Genius Soldier Hacks That Saved Lives in World War II. The video received 2-3 million views. The comment section filled with reactions. "Why isn't this taught in history class?" "This man deserves a medal." "The military always ignores the grunts." "My grandfather was a sniper in Europe. I wonder if he knew about this." 3 weeks after Morrison's video was published, the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Moore issued a press release acknowledging Michael Donovan's contribution to modern sniper tactics. The release was brief, 2 paragraphs, but it used Donovan's name. It mentioned Metz. It credited him with the mirror observation technique. The press release was published on the Sniper School's website and sent to military news outlets. 5 websites ran the story. The mainstream press ignored it. But for the first time since November 1944, the United States Army officially acknowledged that Private First Class Michael James Donovan had invented something important. It took 79 years. Michael and Dorothy's daughters, Patricia, Susan and Rebecca, received copies of the press release in March 2023. Patricia, the eldest, 68 years old, read it and cried. Her father had been dead for 36 years, her mother had been dead for 4 years. Neither of them lived to see the army admit the truth. They waited until everyone was dead. Patricia told a reporter from the Montana Standard, "Mum fought for this for 30 years. Dad never asked for it, but he deserved it, and the army waited until nobody was left to thank." The reporter asked Patricia what she thought her father would say if he'd seen the press release. Patricia smiled, a sad smile that looked exactly like the smile in Michael's old army photographs. "He'd probably say it doesn't matter," Patricia said, and then he'd ask if there was any way to get the technique taught to more soldiers, because that's all he ever cared about, making sure other men didn't die the way Hewitt and Chen did. In 2024, the U.S. Army Sniper School added a brief historical note to its offset observation training module. The note reads, "The technique of using angled mirrors for peripheral threat detection was pioneered by PFC Michael J. Donovan during the Siege of Metz, November 1944. Donovan's field innovation saved an estimated 300 lives and influenced modern situational awareness tactics. 17 words, one sentence of institutional memory. It's more than most soldiers get. It's less than Donovan deserved." Michael Donovan's story teaches us something uncomfortable about military innovation. The best ideas often come from the bottom, not the top. From surveyors, not strategists. From men whose friends are bleeding out beside them, not from men reading reports in safe headquarters, 200 miles behind the lines. And those ideas, the ones that save lives, the ones that change tactics, the ones that actually work, are often suppressed, ignored or forgotten because they didn't come through proper channels. The mirror technique should have been adopted officially in December 1944. It should have been issued as standard equipment by January 1945. American factories were producing millions of items for the war effort. They could have manufactured angled mirrors designed specifically for rifle mounting. The technique could have been taught at sniper schools, documented in field manuals, credited properly. Instead, soldiers had to rediscover it independently, hide it from inspections, pass it along in whispers, and hope they didn't get court-martialed for modifying government property. And when the war ended, the innovation disappeared into bureaucratic limbo for 50 years. Michael Donovan died thinking nobody cared what he'd done. Dorothy Donovan died still fighting to make people care. Their daughters carry the memory now, but they're in their 60s and 70s. Soon, nobody will be left who remembers Michael personally. That's how history forgets, not dramatically, not through censorship or cover-up, just through time and bureaucracy, and the simple fact that most people don't care about the stories of men who never got medals or monuments. But we care. We're keeping these stories alive. We're making sure names like Michael Donovan, James Hewitt, Leonard Chen, Bobby Ketchum, Howard Finch don't disappear completely. If Michael's story taught you something, if you think he deserved better than 79 years of silence, help us keep his memory alive. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates real history, not sanitized versions. Subscribe so you don't miss the next forgotten story. And comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've heard of Donovan before today. Tell us if someone in your family served, if you've served, if stories like this matter to you. Because they do matter. Every single one of these forgotten soldiers matters. And the only way they stay remembered is if people like you decide they're worth remembering. Thanks for watching. Thanks for caring. And thanks for keeping Michael Donovan's name alive. Additional image prompts for new chapters. Prompt 5. Wee Tui. American soldiers examining rifle modification in field position, multiple snipers gathered around Springfield rifle with mirror attachment, winter 1945 German border, military discussion scene, tactical equipment spread on ground, historical accuracy, camaraderie among troops, overcast weather. Prompt 6. Elderly woman in 1990s nursing home holding framed military photograph of young Wei-2 soldier, emotional interview scene, Springfield rifle with mirror displayed on table, documentary filming setup, natural indoor lighting, historical preservation moment, memorial tribute atmosphere. Prompt 7. Museum display case showing modified WW sniper rifle with small mirror mounted on stock, informational placard visible. Springfield M1903 with period-correct scope, professional museum lighting, historical artifact presentation, educational exhibit, preserved military equipment. Prompt 8. Modern military training facility, instructor demonstrating offset observation technique to soldiers. Contemporary sniper rifle with advanced mirror system, tactical classroom environment, connection between historical and modern sniper tactics, professional military education, technological evolution of field innovation. The U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning now teaches a technique called offset observation, using small angled mirrors or prisms mounted on rifles for peripheral threat detection. The instructors don't mention Michael Donovan. Most don't know his name. There's a small display in the Met's History Museum in the section covering the 1944 siege. Among the rifles and uniforms, there's a photograph of a modified Springfield M1903 with a mirror taped to the stock. The placard reads, "Improvised American Sniper Rifle, November 1944. Origin unknown." That's all that remains. Michael Donovan wasn't a general. He wasn't a hero the newspapers celebrated. He was a short kid from Montana who watched his friends die and refused to accept it. He broke the rules because the rules were killing people. He used a shaving mirror and medical tape to solve a problem that had stumped trained tacticians. And he saved lives. 43 German snipers dead, 2 American snipers lost. The math is clear. The war forgot him anyway. If this story moved you, if you think Michael Donovan deserved better than an anonymous display in a museum, hit that like button. Share this video. Make sure his name doesn't disappear completely. Subscribe to this channel if you believe the real heroes of history weren't always the ones with medals and parades. Sometimes they were surveyors from Montana with steady hands and a broken mirror. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've ever heard of Donovan before. Tell us if you think field soldiers should get credit for innovations that save lives. These stories matter. The men who lived them matter. Thanks for keeping their memory alive.